who are on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, who are performing a variety of missions and tasks everywhere from the most elite of warriors, our Navy SEALs, to explosive ordnance disposal, construction battalions, intelligence specialists, logisticians, and sailors who are there in an individual capacity, about 7,500, who are filling in areas where we can make a contribution to our efforts there. In addition to that 15,500 that are on the ground, there are approximately another 17,000 who are at sea in the Middle East. As you may know, we now have two aircraft carriers that are operating there, the Harry S. Truman and the Abraham Lincoln, and they'll operate in the Arabian Gulf and in the North Arabian Sea. And on any given day, they're providing about 30% of the fixed wing sorties that are flying in support of our troops on the ground. But we also in the Navy believe that our interests are global. And while we're heavily focused, we're totally committed to the fights there. Globally, today we have about 61,000 sailors who are deployed, and about 40% of our ships, our submarines, and our aircraft squadrons are deployed around the globe. Our Navy today consists of 288 ships. It is the smallest Navy that we have been since 1916, when our global interests and responsibilities weren't quite what they are today. We have about 3,900 airplanes, and our active force is 328,000 sailors active, about 65,000 reserve, and about 165,000 Navy civilians. So that gives you a size of what we are. But I think that as we look to the future, and as we, at some point in time, come out of Iraq and Afghanistan, I believe that the role of the Navy will become increasingly important for a couple of reasons. One is that there will be increased sensitivity with regard to sovereignty. Countries will become more sensitive, countries will become more reserved in a large foreign ground presence on their soil. I believe that that's a trend that we are going to see. I've seen it in my operational commands where there's a desire to interact, but there's always the sensitivity with regard to troops on the ground. I also would submit that as we come off of the wars that we are in, that there will be great thought given prior to commitment of large forces in a foreign land. And I also believe that the nature of our globalized world, the prosperity that derives from that, will also find value in naval forces and what naval forces provide. As the President has said, that it's a just and a sustainable international order that will be the indispensable factor in global prosperity and in peace. And I agree with that. It was reinforced by the President again in India. And I really do believe it's that environment that is going to provide for the prosperity and security of the future. Because at the end of the day, the globalized world that we live in and the benefits that we derive from that world really stem from that which moves on the world's oceans. On any given day, about 90% of the trade is moving on the sea. About $40 billion worth of oil moves through the strategic choke points every day. And annually, about $3.2 trillion move on transoceanic cables that encircle the globe and enable that commerce to take place. And I believe that regardless of what disordered activity may exist ashore, that sort of global intercourse, that trade, that commerce, that interaction will continue on. And that will continue on in the world's ocean. And we will enjoy the benefits of that which flows from that trade. I also believe we're going to see a continuing trend in the area of demographics. We are continuing to see populations compressing down to the coastlines on every continent. And in fact, if you look around the world and you take into account the mega cities that exist, almost all of them exist in this littoral area, that band that is just off the coast, and that area that will be able to be influenced from the littoral area or the coastal waters of the continents. We're also going to see that population continue to grow, continue to compress, and in fact, the urban population in 2050 will be the same as the global population in 2004. So we're going to continue to see these megacities swell and greater populations in the littoral areas. I would also submit that as I look around the world, and we tend to be captured by the Middle East, by the Western Pacific, that in the future, the continent of Africa will figure more into our discussions than it does today. And one of the questions that I have and that I keep asking those who work for me is, how do we see Africa opening up to this maritime domain? And it's a question that I've sought from those who are in the maritime business. When I ask them the question, where are you going in Africa? They look at me and say, we're still trying to figure that out. But I think that in the next 10 or 15 years will play much more than it does today. The other area that will change the nature of this maritime environment is the expansion of the Panama Canal, something that is often not talked about. I'm not sure it's on the front burner of most in our country, but that expansion project is taking place, and the Panama Canal will change its throughput in about 2015 or 2016 to where about 90% of global shipping will be able to pass through, and 86% of liquid natural gas tankers will be able to pass through that canal, whereas today only 6% can pass through. And I think that will fundamentally change the maritime routes that come through the Caribbean and through the southern waters that are of great interest to us, and also to the western approaches from the Pacific. And then, of course, the changes that will begin to take place in the not too distant future when we open the fifth ocean, which is the Arctic. That, in my opinion, will begin to see the migration of fishing stocks into the cooler water, which will drive fishing fleets into those areas, which will probably change the cost of that protein source. Not so significant for those of us in the United States, but when you get into Africa and Asia, where they're extracting about a quarter of their protein from the ocean, that will have a significant effect on thinking and on activities in the polar reaches. I think that we then will see mineral extraction begin to take place, and then probably in the next 20 years or so, when the ice has diminished enough, you're going to begin to see some more profitable transportation taking place across the top of the globe. We have not seen a change like that since the end of the Ice Age, and it's one that will have a significant effect on trade and on prosperity. So as I also look out into the future, I see an environment in which there is a lot more ocean out there. As I talk about the receding of the ice in the Arctic, for a Navy guy, that's great because it just means there's more water in which to operate. But, you know, we will see the oceans play a more significant role. And if you look at the current conflicts and you look at the global recession and some of the political thought that we're facing in the nation, invariably some are led to believe that our country is in an inevitable decline. And I would submit that now is when we have to think about that global focus more than any other time, because our security ultimately will rest on the economy of our country and how we play on that global stage. I think that we must meet that perception head on, because there is no one now that can replace our global presence. Clearly, There is no Navy that can replace the global presence that we as a Navy have. I would also submit that the partnerships that we have been able to forge over the past few years have led to a reawakening of the roles of navies and the activities that we are engaged in, and how that can benefit the security and prosperity. And I often cite the example of our International Seapower Symposium that we host at our War College every 2 years. 4 years ago, 67 countries came. Last October, 102 countries came. And when I look around the world and I meet with my friends and partners, we're beginning to see constructs that are taking place regionally that enhance the maritime security in the various regions, and nothing can replace that. From a strategic perspective, I would say that investment of a global fleet is an investment that is very well made. And whether it's to have the fleet to be able to project the power and to control the seas, or if you're there to have a fleet that can respond, as we have done in Haiti and Pakistan and in Indonesia after a natural disaster, that is a value that is extraordinary. As you look at all of those capabilities, you will find the Navy's core capabilities reflected in those types of missions. That's to be a forward Navy, to be a Navy with enough deterrent strength that it is in fact a deterrent, to be able to control the sea, to be able to provide power projection wherever and whenever needed, to be able to contribute to maritime security, and to provide humanitarian assistance and disaster response whenever and wherever it is needed. I think it's also important to recognize what you invest in when you invest in a Navy. And although you can look at what we do as a service and the types of things that we operate, I would ask that you amortize that over the life of the platform. For example, the USS Enterprise, which we are now preparing to deploy to Afghanistan. Its first mission as a commissioned warship in the United States Navy was to participate in the Cuban Missile Crisis. That is a good investment. This Saturday, I will commission the Navy's newest warship, the USS Gravely, in Wilmington, North Carolina. It'll be a great day for the Navy. It'll be a great day for the nation. But the last commanding officer of that ship is 7 years old today. And so that is another indication of how long these great capabilities that we procure and that we sail will serve our nation. So I believe that's important to take into account. I would also talk briefly about the view that we have about our future and the areas that we believe are important to our Navy. When we issued our maritime strategy a few years ago in the fall of 2007, we talked about the core capabilities that I mentioned, the deterrence and all the way through humanitarian assistance. But we also talked about how important it was to focus on two particular areas, the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean region and the Arabian Gulf, because I believe it is from those two areas where our security and our prosperity will be most effective. And I would say that as we look to the future, our attention should be drawn to Asia, because that will continue to shape the economic and the security environment for the next couple of decades. And without a global Navy, without a Navy that can influence in those regions, then we forfeit the opportunity, we forfeit the ability to shape that region and to be able to cooperate and work closely with our friends, our allies, and our partners who are there. And so as I wrap up, I would simply say that I believe that credible sea power can form the basis for not only what we need to do today, but for how we can shape the future and how we can enable the follow-on forces, should those follow-on forces be required. Some might argue that one guided missile destroyer off the coast of Somalia doesn't solve the problem of piracy. And I would tell you that that one ship does not do that. But the fact of the matter is that the countries that have come together, the navies that have come together in that area, have made a significant difference in being able to bring a measure of normalcy to that area. And we have thwarted more pirate attempts than have succeeded. And so it's this building of naval forces, the coming together, that I think is extremely important to us. I would also say that as you look at the staying power of navies, and particularly a global navy like the United States Navy, you know, we have been flying into Afghanistan for the last 10 years from our carriers in the Gulf without the requirement for any footprint ashore. We also, as a result of who we are and what we do, have been able to provide that humanitarian assistance that responds to the Haitis and to the Pakistans and to the tsunamis in the Pacific without having to mount an effort to go there. We simply do it in stride. And it's also from our ships at sea that we're able to provide that presence ashore for however length of time may be needed, and then quickly bring it back to address those issues of sovereignty as we go in to the future. And so as we look to this future, I think now is the time to look at our priorities, to look at the capabilities that we need, to, as we say in the Navy, tack those priorities to the mast and look at what those priorities are and what it means to the nation to have them or not to have them. Because at the end of the day, we will be better off with a global Navy that has global reach, that can have global effects to provide for the security and prosperity of our country. And with that, I would really like to get to your questions, and I hope that I've primed the pump a little bit on some thoughts, and the floor is open. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Admiral Roughead, for those characteristically insightful and forward-looking remarks. Let's now open it up to questions. There's a microphone out there, and as you get it, please identify yourself and keep your question as brief as possible. In the second row first. Let's wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Terry Murphy. I got all the way up to 03 in the U.S. Navy and Surface Navy and Missile Navy.
Those were good days, if I recall myself being in 03.
A quick question, Admiral. My wife and I were in Australia this summer during the election, where frankly this issue was not in. But on the 5th of August, I know the date exact, there was a major article in the Australian newspaper, you probably know about.
Mm-hmm.
And the headline read, quote unquote, "As the U.S. wanes, China gains." The subhead was, "The tectonic plates are shifting under the Pacific." And the subhead was, "Australia's security was in question for the first time since the Battle of the Coral Sea." Now, I won't try to go through the whole article, but I wonder whether you would comment on the theme that it appears to have.
Yeah, I think, and as I touched on, I think there are many who would say, you know, that as you look at events that are taking place, that we are in decline. I would also say that I was in Australia about a month ago, there on a counterpart visit, but also to participate in the West Pacific Naval Coast. And I would say that that those who are there, those who look to the United States, and particularly the United States Navy, realize the importance of our presence and the capability that we have there, and our continuing commitment to remain in the West Pacific. I think it's also important to note that as the Australians go forward, they are going forward and are bringing online capabilities that are very much like ours. As you know, they're in the process of getting ready to build their first Aegis-equipped surface combatant. They're also, like us, procuring a new generation and the same type of maritime patrol aircraft. And so our commitment and the alliance that we have there, the relationships that we have with countries in the region, not just our great friends and Pakistan here, but the countries in Southeast Asia, the reception and the relationship that I enjoyed at the Western Pacific Naval Symposium is indicative of the importance that they place on the relationship with us. And I can tell you that I place great importance on the relationship that we have with them. We're there to stay. We've been there a long time. And the capabilities that we have in that part of the world are pretty extraordinary.
Afternoon, Jan Van Dal, CSBA. A question about air-sea battle.
Yeah.
Your statement and General Schwartz's, or your statements in public, have been quite consistent, but one gets a sense that at somewhat lower levels that there are distinct differences between Navy and Air Force. Navy tending more towards the real operational concept, Air Force more towards the strategic vision paper, maybe like maybe 2010, 2020. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I would say that without getting into any of the details of the work that we're doing, I think that the air-sea battle has been extremely important for both services. It has brought us together and has allowed us to look at a future. It has allowed us to look at capabilities. It's allowed us to look at how we can complement or how we can potentially share in a more effective way between the services, or even divest in some cases, say that belongs to the other service. I would also say that as a result of that, we have seen some not insignificant developments between the two services in our approach to some of the larger unmanned aerial vehicles that in years past you would not have seen that level of cooperation. So I've been very pleased, and even though there may be perceptions that we're coming at air-sea battle in a different way, as I see us coming together, I think it's extremely complementary, and I think it's very constructive, very positive. And I'm not simply saying that to put a type on the air-sea battle, but I think it's been probably one of the best things the services have done in a long, long time.
Robbie Harris,
Hi, Rob.
former naval person. First, thank you for your comments today, and thank you for your leadership of our Navy. And I'll take the opportunity here to say that I think you've made some of the bravest decisions over the past several years of any recent CNO.
Thank you.
Namely, what you've done with the ballistic missile defense at sea, that decision on DDG 51, your creation of the new N2 and 6 Cyber Command. All those, I think, are remarkable decisions, and I compliment you, sir, as just a 06, retired 06. But I do think that they are super decisions and speak to your leadership. You made a compelling case today, for the importance of Navy today and the growing importance of Navy in the years to come. You're well aware of the tipping point study done by CNA and NAAOS. You used the term global Navy several times in your speech today, and the tipping point study calls into question just how global a Navy we will have in the future. And the case is certainly there for a global Navy. So I guess the question is, how do you square that circle? Unless the DoD pie becomes larger, which doesn't seem very likely, and if the DoD pie doesn't become larger, then that would suggest to some that Navy's share of the existing pie should grow relative to the other. And I think it's hard for a service chief to make that case. So how do you grow the Navy to the size that it should be to indeed be a global Navy, given the constraints that exist?
Thanks. That's my life, to be able to look at the future and then look at the investment decisions that we're going to make. And I think it's very easy, as you so well know, because I can't think of anyone who has probably thought or studied, opined on how we need to go forward with you, Robert. But the fact of the matter is, it's very easy to say, well, we need a bigger Navy, and if I wanted to grow the Navy very quickly, we could buy a bunch of high-speed vessels. And so I think it's important that when we talk about the size, where we want to be, that we also get the balance right. Balanced discussion is one that I think is important to have as often as we can. There's no question in my mind that what we are closing in on with regard to our new littoral combat ship, I think, is going to be a significant step towards structure, quantity, and capability. I'm an unabashed LCS advocate. As you know, we've worked this program very hard, and we've gotten it to a point now where our strategy and competition work, and we're on the verge, I think, of really being able to start to crank these ships out. And I think that those ships can serve us extraordinarily well, not just in the mission areas of ASW, surface warfare, mine warfare, but as I talk about the littoral, that they are ideally suited for that. They are also ideally suited for interaction with other navies, and also as ships that can give us the capacity to carry irregular capability capacity. So I think that is helpful. There is no question that when we look at our economy and future budget, and I am a firm believer in the fact that the real strength of the nation does rise, that we in the department have to look at how we can provide the capabilities that the nation needs, the nation wants, and adjustments that we make. As you know, we've recently gone through some efforts in the department to garner efficiencies that we have then been able to put back into procurement. And, so I think that's part of the process. But at the end of the day, I think that the discussion has to take about what size of fleet does the nation need for our industry. And I believe that events like this allow us to talk about that and to see the value of what we bring as a Navy and the capability that we can provide the nation. Environment that I believe in the future will be very well suited to our dimension.
Martin Murphy, I think some of the, actually given the answer, some of the things, nevertheless, how dismayed were you?
Well, thank you. And first, I don't opine on the judgments of my colleagues and the choices that they have to make. But I think that it's important to note the relationship and the way that we as two navies operate together, the way that we support one another, and a lot of the commonality that we have within our two navies. I would say that when you look at our submarine forces, probably no two better submarine forces in the world. The way that we're going together on the new strategic deterrent, all that is moving in the right direction. But every country is going to have to make its decision how it sets up support structure and priorities and places on it. And the First Sea Lord and I will continue to look at ways to cooperate with one another, how we support one another, and how we can bring our navies together to go off and do the things that are making sense. So, I watched it very closely out of professional interest, but at the end of the day, we'll still continue to be partners that are in a pretty extraordinary place.
Admiral Eric McVaden,
Yep.
Institute for Foreign Policy Analysis and a former naval officer. Is
See
it
you
still, good to see you. Is it still the right question to ask how we balance hedging against China, such things as China's anti-ship ballistic missile and submarine threat with its anti-ship cruise missiles and so forth, and how we cooperate and engage with China? And for example, you mentioned the Arctic. One can hope that we're exploiting the Arctic with China among the countries involved and so forth. How can we do that, both with weapon systems and policy?
Yeah, thank you. I think no surprise of the importance I place on the relationship that our Navy has with the PLA Navy. I think you know that over the years I've sought to have a cooperative relationship with them, and in the Pacific had some rather groundbreaking activity with the PLA Navy. I believe that what they're doing in the Somali Basin, the counter-piracy, is extraordinarily positive, and I would like to see that same type of cooperation and indeed cooperative naval activity take place in the Pacific as well. And I would welcome that as we go forward. I see the changes in the growth in the PLA Navy to be consistent with what rising economies in their navies have done over time. Economies grow, navies grow, particularly if that economy is based on trade. We're seeing that happen. China is developing a range of capabilities, whether it's in their submarine force, aviation, ballistic missile force, and as a naval professional, I watch that very closely. And as a Navy that operates in the Western Pacific, I will ensure that our options are always open as we operate there. And so that's part of what I do as I look to the future and evolve the Navy that I have the privilege to lead.
Sure, good afternoon. Thank you for the presentation. A question, I was the lead analyst at the U.S. Special Operations Command. We developed a program of record for the CV-22, the 50 aircraft. At that time I worked the Navy had a program of record of 48 aircraft, and that was based on the need to support CSAR, to support NSW, and some logistic support. The Marine programs, is continuing to go on. The ASOC, what's the future hold for the Navy's, quote, program of record 48 B-22?
Yeah, well, right now I don't have a program of record for Navy B-22, and have not had one. But as you know, we look to the future. We will be looking at, for us, the most important part will be particularly the carrier on-board delivery. Will V-22 enter into that? I don't know, but we'll probably be looking at that as an option. But we don't have to get to that for some time. I think that where the Marines are with the V-22, how they've used it, and how we are integrating it onto our amphibious ships, I think has gone quite well. But as far as a program of record for the Navy, we don't have.
Admiral Colin Clark, DoD Buzz.
Yeah.
As you made the decision to broaden the LCS bot to yard, how much did industrial base play in that, and how much did the vision that you're talking about here today of more water, more littoral presence play into it?
Yeah.
What was the thing?
Well, for me, and what is being talked about is we drove with a competitive strategy that ultimately would end up in a buy of 10 plus another buy of 5. As we looked at where we were as a result of the strategy, we found that we were in a position that if we went to both builders, then we could have 10. I'm not a math whiz, but 20 is better than 15 as far as I'm. On top of which, as you know, where each of the designs fulfill the littoral combat ship mission. The designs are different, and they bring different attributes that I believe will be quite attractive as we go forward. So we had the opportunity to see littoral combat ships come into our Navy more quickly. I'm hopeful that we will be able to have the legislative authorization modified to allow us to go down this path, because I think it's in the best interest of the Navy and the capabilities that we will have. I believe that because of the competitive strategy and what we've been able to do with the price on LCS, it's the best interest of the taxpayer. And I have, from the time I've been the CNO, as I look at our procurement programs, I look at the mission. I also look at my budget. I also look at the industrial base, because I do believe that our industrial base, particularly as it applies to shipbuilding, high-end aircraft, is a strategic asset. And the importance of having that base and retaining a base that can produce the type of ships and airplanes that we need to do the work that I talked about, I think is important. But for me, first and foremost, it was being able to get significant capability and capacity, because we touched on a couple of times, capacity is the real driver for me today. So if I can get more capacity sooner and it meets the mission needs, that's where I'm going to be. We've been working very closely with the Hill over the last
Good afternoon, Admiral.
Yep.
My name is Joe Bosco. I'm a national security consultant, formerly with the Navy. Follow up to the question from Admiral. There's been a big push by the Navy to cultivate. I wonder how much analysis and downside, like what kind of you are occurring. Find it that think tank concept. Admiral Freer, who was then commander of the fleet, described the great effort it made to cultivate military fleet at the time. And he pointed out that it's worth the time and effort, because at some point, if the balloon ever went up, he would know who to call. Well, a few years later, Admiral Freer was ambassador to China. The balloon went up to the EP-3, and Admiral Freer took out his roller deck, but none of his calls were returned.
Yep, I would say something about very much, but if you recall, not too long ago, we had one of our surveillance ships that had some interaction with some Chinese fishing vessels, and I spent an hour on the phone. So I do believe that it is important to have relationships among senior naval and military leaders that allows a discussion to take place, even at times when it may be awkward. But if you haven't been able to establish that relationship, it's harder to try and establish one when you're trying to sort through something that's problematic. So I think the relationships are important, and I believe that we should seek to have that cooperative and transparent relationship with the field.
Thank you, Admiral. Timothy Walton with Delegate. I definitely second Robbie Harris's remarks on looking at the size of the Navy, maybe what share of the budget increase. You mentioned that you had looked at efficiency. Are you looking at damage strike there, structure, looking at efficiency that sector or Congress or other look to?
I would say that as we have, look at our accounts, I'm very mindful of how much, particularly on the manpower side, goes to things like healthcare, housing, and it is not lost on me, and nor is it lost on anyone who works for me, that one of the greatest pressures that keep impacting our budgets is really the cost of manpower. And I would submit that's not unique to the military. It's not unique to the Navy. Anyone who runs a business has to deal with that, because when you're working your budget, it's the first thing you have to do is make payroll. And I take that very seriously. And there's no question that healthcare is large. But at the end of the day, it's also a program that spans, that goes well beyond the Navy. And so it really requires a broader look.
And going to stop on the French.
Good to see you.
I've read recently a paper that there was a guidance from you,
right?
And you were talking in that paper about the upco financing. I'd like to know a little bit more about this. What is your thought about that? How do you position the Navy with this upco financing concept? Would it be a sign of more relations to a strategy in the future? How do you see that at the moment?
Yeah. For me, I don't see it as isolationist. I see it as being present, being able to work in various areas, to be able to use navies as a means to actually enhance relationships rather than walk away from them. Because I have found over the years that it's very easy for navies to come together, to cooperate, to work together in a way that ground forces or even air forces don't enjoy, simply because of the issues that I talked about of bringing presence into another country. So I think that it's a very good vehicle to develop those types of relations. I would use the counter-piracy as an example. The fact that for almost 2 years we have been conducting military operations on a daily basis with the PLA Navy, the Russian Navy, the Malaysian Navy, the Indian Navy, the EU, NATO, Korea, Japan. That is something that no other service is doing on a daily basis. From a joint perspective, the ability to take the capabilities that we have, whether it's an aircraft carrier, or an amphibious ship, or even one of our combatants, to be able to interact with other navies is equally important. And I cite the example of a few months ago when we had one of your airplanes recover on one of our aircraft carriers, and we brought it into the hangar bay and conducted an engine change and then launched. Those are capabilities that I think the more we can work together, the more we can do together, have great benefit in the future. And I'm very pleased that as we speak, Charles de Gaulle, your aircraft carrier, is coming into the area of operations where our aircraft carriers are. And during my July visit to France, we talked about the opportunities that exist for us to operate together. Those are things that navies can do that are not encumbered by some of the sensitivities that I alluded to. So having a Navy that is capable and being able to go forward, being able to influence events, and then being able to move quickly, I think it's extremely important. And in my career alone, many examples where we would be operating in one part of the world, and 8 days later, without requesting permission from anyone, we're operating in another part of the world. That's what navies do. That's what global navies do. That's what I believe is important to think about in the future, and to determine what is it that we want to be able to do Where do we want to do it? And then using that to facilitate relationships that I think will become pretty.
Well, thank you very much, Admiral Roughead. It was a perfect way to end your remarks.
Thank you.
We, on behalf of my colleagues here at Hudson Institute, especially Senior Vice President Anders Wimbush, Senior Fellow Seth Cropsey, we want to thank you for taking part in this event, which is part of our Maritime Studies program. We fully comprehend the need for a strong and powerful U.S. Navy as for our nation's peace and prosperity, and thank you and your colleagues for all you do for us.
Thank you very much.